Hi, I'm James, the audio lead and one of the directors of Fish Tin Games, and this video is going to be an overview and a brief breakdown of some of the sounds from our latest horror game, the Zhukov Line. The Zhukov Line is a one-room horror game set on a livestock train in a dystopian Soviet state. The basic gameplay of the Zhukov Line is that you need to keep systems operational at the front of the train in order to stop whatever is in the back of the train getting to you before you reach the end of your destination for each day. And there are 3 days in the main run, and an endless mode, and a tutorial, which doesn't really count as a day, it's more of a day zero. So this game was actually made for the Scream Jam 2023 in October last year, and the vast majority of the game was made in about a week, and then between October and January, that's when the rest of the game was made, including all of the marketing and all of the release stuff and the tutorial, a bunch of stuff to make the game feel a bit better. So for the Zhukov Line in particular, I have split up the types of sounds that I would be making into 3 major categories, which are ambience, sound effects, and music. To break it down into subcategories, in ambience we have ambience beds, which are the overall 2D ambience. And 3D ambience emitters, which are ambience sounds emitting from an object in the world. In the sound effects category, we have both diegetic and non-diegetic user interface sounds. Interactables, which is anything that you interact with in the world that is going to make a sound. Looping interactables, which is more of the same thing but in a looping sense. Diegetic sound effects, which are sound effects in the world that play when something happens. Non-diegetic sound effects, which are a more supporting cinematic sound effect. And then we have music, which in the Zhukov Line there is no diegetic music, there is only non-diegetic music to support the feeling of the game. And if you're confused and don't know what diegetic and non-diegetic are, diegetic is just something that happens in the world and would play a sound. For example, you open a door and the door sound plays, whereas non-diegetic is like if you hear a soundtrack playing over and edited over the footage that you see. It's not in the game world, but you still hear it as a viewer. So when it comes to some audio design philosophies, I try to have a little bit of influence by RPG horror games and indie horror games that were most likely made by solo developers. I try to add a little bit of an intentional scuffedness, which is to say, some of these, there's a vibe that you get when you play an RPG horror game or an indie horror game where you feel like they've probably got most of the sounds from freesound.org, and most of them aren't fully designed, it's just a feeling, and it's just this sort of vibe that you get for these games, which that's what adds a lot of the character and a lot of the charm that you get in indie horror games. And so that goes for most of the sounds, and then when it comes to the jump scares and the flash scares and the cinematic sort of stuff, those are mostly inspired by Alan Wake 2, just because I was playing Alan Wake 2 at the time and I loved how it sounded, and I just thought I'm going to put that into the game and we'll see how it goes. So here we are in Reaper. So I don't recommend that you set up your project like this. It's a bit of a state. This is what I did because we were working on the project for a week pretty much. So I just tried to do it in the quickest way possible, and more sounds kept getting added. So anyway, I'm going to break down a few different types of sounds, probably some interactables, the flash scales that are in the game, the welder, the reactor, and some of the UI sounds. And I'm not going to go into great detail. I'll show you a couple of each. And I'll explain my ideas behind what comes up. So let's start with the hazmat suit. So it's just some cloth Foley sounds. And those are, you know, don't have the most high end. You're sort of just picking up this hazmat suit, putting it on, and it's a couple of cloth Foley layers put together. And that's all well and good. And then you go to the place sounds, and it's like you're putting it down. And that's fine. And so with this, the place sounds have a little bit more low end because they're getting placed, and that's generally the vibe that I went for all of the pickup and place sounds, except the Weldon mask, which is one that you're putting on your head, so it's right next to your head. So this is when you pick it up and put it on your head, which is a bit, you know, it's a bit hyper realistic, but like I always say, we're not going for realism, we're going for believability. So I can listen to that and believe that I'm putting a Weldon mask on my head, even if it doesn't sound like that in real life, and then putting it away. You know, it's, you know, these are just like metal draws being shut or whatever. But the reason why this sounds heavier is because it's gone right on your head, whereas this is going to be far away from you. So let's move on to picking up the wrench, because it's one of the basic sounds, but let's see how it sounds. So these are variations. I've took a couple of sounds and glued them together. I can see that from this. Pretty basic. I mean, that's not what it sounds like when you pick it up in real life, but like I said, believability over realism. I want to be able to know that I've picked something up rather than it be realistic, because realistically it's barely going to make a sound. It might be like a tiny little rattle, but that's not real. That's not going to indicate to the player that they have picked something up. And then placing it will probably be something similar, but you know, it sounds like you've placed it on metal or something. So here we have the vial. This is like one of the few sounds that I actually recorded. So I have some water here. I can break down these. I have two different states for this. So when you pick up an empty vial, which is kind of like like a test tube, just a little bit of ping metal. Like I said, it's not realistic, it's believable. And I actually recorded a teacup for this. And then when it's full, there is like the same sound, but some like water droplets. Pretty basic, pretty simple. So here we have dispensing the vial, which is a bunch of different layers. Pressure cooker, I don't know what that is, it's kind of like a low end thingy. And then some air, which is a bunch of different layers. Let's see what it sounds like. That is meant to be like a machine chucking something up, so we have... And these might sound a bit harsh, a bit dodgy, but the sound is greater than the sum of its parts. I'll say that, because, you know, when it's a good volume, it's good. Well, this is for when you are at the reactor, and this sounds pretty cool. And there's basically no reverb in most of these sounds because there's I'll get into that later, but I've not put much actual room reverb on these sounds. And we have a couple of different layers. And that's the same for all three variations. Most of the things that you interact with in the game are basic, following that philosophy that it's a bit more advanced than probably what a solo dev would do, picking up random sounds from freesound.org. But I feel like I'm trying to capture that vibe while still making the sounds sound good and sound clean and clear and obvious to the player what they're actually picking up. And that's the language that you use in sound is always the most important thing. So here we have the pipe sound. So there's two elements to this sound. There is the pipe itself busting, which is really loud, so I'm going to turn it down. So that's what it sounds like when the pipe busts. And then I've added this loop that is an infinite loop of the air in the pipe. And so if we listen to this on loop, on its own, it sounds like this. It's a clean infinite loop, and it basically means you can have this explosion. It goes well into the infinite loop, and then the infinite loop will play it until you weld it shut. So here we have the welder. Hopefully this isn't too loud. I'm going to turn it down just in case. And that's just a couple different sounds that sound like welding. So we have sparks, lightning, loop, and then I've looped it again, and then a micro thingy. I don't even know what it is, but let's hear it. Cool. And so what I've done is I've set it so that when you click on the welder in the game, you hear this loop and then when you let go of the welder, you hear this tiny little tail. So you can be at any point in this loop, and then as soon as you hear this little fade out, it sounds nice. So we have here one of the flash scales. It's going to be kind of loud, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. So the philosophy behind these sounds is completely just messed up, completely distorted out of its mind. Bullshit, pretty much. So as you can see, there's a bunch of just different layers that have just been chopped and messed up, and I have a bunch of crazy plugins, Decapitator, OTT, which are just crazy, like compression, distortion, madness. So you can hear a lot of that distortion coming through. I've taken another sound and just completely messed with it, and then put it as a layer on this sound. And then here, a couple of lighter sparks, but because of the effects, it really sounds like this. And then I've added a bunch of effects. Then you add, what's this? It's a couple of different layers messed up and mixed up with, and then I've just, mangled that. That has some tremolo, some transient shaper, and OTT like every other layer on the flash scales. So basically the philosophy is just like try and mango stuff up and see what you like, and then what I did was I timed I made the video for the jump scares, so I timed the video to the sound. So let me see if there's a more messed up one here. Yeah, you can see this is kind of messed up. So a lot of this is like just doing whatever and seeing what sticks, and then a lot of it is taking what you've done with that and smoothing it out with different stuff. So I had to turn the master down on this one. So this one's a bit crazy. So it's just a lot of layers put together and messed with and, mangled once again. But there's this thing called LKC Variator, and it's got this button right here called Chernobyl. And basically what this does is it takes an audio clip, and you can apply these settings and mutate it within parameters, obviously. So if I select this, mutate, and it's going to change it based on this stuff here. But Chernobyl, what that does is it randomizes all of these elements and makes it go crazy. And you can see this. You can do it as much as you want, and then the sound will go crazy. You just get whatever you need. So, little tip for if you're needing to make some mangled sounds. Hopefully that was plenty of information for designing the actual sounds in the game. I don't want it to go in too much detail about the ins and outs of sound design and layering and timing and pacing and all that kind of thing. Those are sound design fundamentals that take years and years to really get perfect. So I will say the thing that's more important for games, in my opinion, especially horror games, is the effectiveness of the use of the sound within its design and how it's going to communicate certain things to the player. Those ideas will be more effective than cranking up OTT and a distortion plugin, whichever specific settings. None of that's going to be useful unless you understand how it's going to affect the player. So here we are in the game engine. I'm just going to show you some of the implementation techniques that I used, and bear in mind everything that I do in Unity is using Unity's built-in systems. Unity's built-in reverb zones, Unity's built-in snapshots and mixers and components. And let me just apologize for the lag. My PC is struggling to do all these things at once. It's fine. But so the first thing I want to talk about is the reverb zone. So I'm using Unity's built-in reverb zone. As you can see, there's a sphere here. And anything that plays inside this zone will have this reverb preset applied to it. As long as if you go onto the sound and there's a reverb zone mix, you can choose how much reverb each specific thing has. And right now, this is for the ambience. So for the ambience we have train tracks, we have train drones, and we have some rattles for the train. So let me go back into the train. So we're in the train, and so if I turn down the train tracks and turn down the train drone, you only hear the rattle and some of the other ambiences. So what I've done is all of these sounds have, here we go. And so we can hear the train tracks and we can hear a bunch of different stuff. And that's all within the reverb zone. So if I had to say with this component, it completely changes the sound. So the next thing I want to talk about is just how the sounds play. And so for example, I have let me take an item in the game. Turn off these gizmos and take a look at the welder. So when you pick up this welder, you click E and a sound will play from the player. So the player has a bunch of these sound effects on him, or her, or I think we know it's a him though. So you'll hear all of the pickup sounds. So for example, we have the welder pickup sound, right? And this will play one of an array of sounds will get picked randomly to go into this source with these settings. It has the highest reverb zone mix. If I go into the game and do this, you'll hear, and that picks it up, and it'll pick one of these 3 sounds for the pickups, and then on the welder itself, which isn't there anymore, which is invisible, I think, you'll hear, you'll hear it being placed. Let me place it down. Cool. So that's pretty basic. It just, it just plays it through the audio source. The next thing would be the mixer snapshots. And so here I have a bunch of snapshots here. If I turn off edit and play mode, and we go to, actually I'll turn it back on. If we go to, this is what the game should sound like usually, right? Main. But if we get to the end of a level and completely level, it will sound like this. Oh, some of the sounds are muted, so it would actually sound, you would hear the music. You would hear that at the end of the level. But during the main game, it sounds like this. When the day starts, it sounds like this. When the game is paused, you only hear some of the ambience, etc. Basically, this is just a way to go between volumes, and you have like a huge array of sounds here being mixed. You want to be able to have specific presets. And so what I do is in each script that when something happens in the game, I say go to snapshot day start when it's at the start of the day, or we're in the end state, the level's complete, it's a game over, there's a flash scare, etc. That all gets controlled with these snapshots. So the next thing I want to talk about is real-time effects, and there's not much in this game, but we have a couple of filters on some of these things, so that when I created the sound, I wanted to control these specific things a little bit more actively within the engine. So if we take a look at the welder, okay, so here we are. We have the wrench. No, we have the welder mask, and as you can hear, there's air coming from the pipe, and so when I use the welder, the sound of air that comes from the pipe is ducked a little bit, so the volume is lower. And so what that does is it basically, I have a thing here that's ducking the volume from the pipe burst air, and when you use the welder, it ducks the volume for the pipe, for the air. And just to stop too much audio coming through at once. Next up, we have some exposed parameters here. These are used for controlling the audio sliders in the game. Well, most of them are, so you can control audio sliders here. Yeah, so exposed parameters are great for that. Basically, you take parameters from the mixer and you can expose them to scripts, and you can control low passes and all sorts of things. And we use that quite a lot for when the enemy breaks through each carriage. And so with each bang that he creates, it goes bang, 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 but each bang has less of a low pass effect on it. The last thing I want to talk about is the way that I use a do not destroy script on, it's a bit messy, it's a bit janky, but I use a do not destroy script on some specific sounds so that they can carry over the sounds into the next scene. So for example, right here on the UI quit SFX, I have a do not destroy script. One of them is going to work. Basically, when I hit menu, you'll hear the sound. It rings out, but as I hit menu, it's taken us to the main scene. The menu scene. The reason why that's important is because when you switch scenes in Unity and you don't use do not destroy, the sound will cut off. This is perfect for adding cohesion between scenes and your game. It makes the game seem like a single presentation. So if I hit menu, as you can see, it plays throughout, and I've hit start, story. And you'll be able to see that sometimes, so that UI start here on the top, yep, so I don't know if you saw it, you might need to go back to look, but it disappears after a certain amount of time when the sound is finished, and then it repopulates with a new UI start and UI quit sound effect. And the reason why there's a UI start when we're in the game is because when you die, or when you die, a UI pop-up will come up saying restart, and we use that restart sound for that. And it goes from this scene to basically any other scene. We use some sounds to transition the scenes and use snapshots to fade between scenes to add cohesion. There's a couple of different ideas I want to leave you with at the end of this, and it's that, first of all, you can just take tips and tricks from other sound designers and use them, don't use them, discard them. I'm just giving you some extra tools to use. And secondly, great sound design is useless without intention. The player comes first, cool sound design comes second, and hopefully you can marry them together. But thanks for watching, download the game on Steam for free, and leave a nice review.